What's up everyone, it's Matt. In this video, I'm going to be covering just about everything that you need to know when it comes to using TradingView.com. And so this video will be especially helpful for those of you that are new to trading or who haven't maybe used TradingView before and who want to figure everything out just a little bit quicker. So I'll be covering the most important settings that you need to know as far as what I've used over the last couple of years and what I found to be especially helpful. And I'll also be going over as many categories as possible, so that way if you do have any questions, hopefully I answer them. Now, just a quick reminder that if at any point in time you find this tutorial helpful, then be sure to drop a like and subscribe. And then for those interested, down below in the description of this video, you can join my trading community as well. Now, if you first go onto TradingView.com, this is what the page is going to look like. You're going to have to go onto the right-hand side up here and click on Get Started. Also, I'm not being paid or sponsored at all by TradingView for making this video, but you guys can get up to $30 to use in an upgraded plan if you sign up with the affiliate link that I provided down in the description. And of course, this doesn't add any additional costs to you. Now, this takes us to the next page over here where if you'd like, you could just sign up for free. However, you're also given the option to upgrade to different tiers, whether it's the Pro, Pro Plus, as well as the Premium tier that gives you additional perks on TradingView. However, in the beginning, I didn't even start off with a Pro account. So that's what I currently have. I find that it's helpful because it gives me additional alerts that I can use. I can have more indicators, I can see more charts, I see less ads, but I did use a free account for many years. So for those of you that are new to trading that just want to start off, trust me, the free version of TradingView is still incredible. And you obviously are given an option here where you can try the Pro tier as well as the other tiers for free for 30 days if you're interested. Now, the last thing before we move on is that if we scroll a little bit further down on this page, you're given an option to upgrade your data because TradingView does provide free data for thousands of different assets. However, some of them are delayed, and so that's where you have these options of where you could upgrade for a couple of dollars per month. So for instance, if you do want to analyze a lot of the futures charts, there's going to be a delay of 10 minutes. But if you want to see the real-time data over here, you can upgrade for $5 a month. So it really comes down to what you guys are trading and if you find that it'll be helpful for you. Now, when you open up your TradingView, it should look something more or less like this. Now, I'm logged into my account, so it does look a little bit different, but for the most part, you're going to see a chart in front of you, and then on the right-hand side, you should see different assets. Now, if you quickly want to change the type of chart that you're looking at, so in this case, I'm looking at Euro USD, and so let's say I want to take a look at the dollar yen. I would just type in USD JPY on my keyboard, and here I'm given many options depending on how many brokers are available through TradingView of where if I choose one of them, so for instance FXCM, this will display the US dollar crossed with the Japanese yen based off of FXCM's data. Now, this can be helpful if you just quickly want to display a chart in front of you, but the section that I use the most frequently, which I believe you guys will use pretty much all the time, especially if you're juggling through different assets that you're trading, is this section over here on the right-hand side. So this is going to be your Watchlist panel. I just chose 2 random charts. I believe if you sign up, you should have more of them. And so if you want to add more, you would just click on the plus icon over here where it says add symbol. And so now when you're given this, you could either scroll up and down and select whichever types of assets you'd like to include onto your watch list panel. So if I want to include the British pound / US dollar, I would click on that. So I click that to add it to my watch list, and you guys can see how that appears over here. Additionally, if we quickly go back to that, you could also type in exactly what you want over here. So if I want to look at Bitcoin, I would type in the ticker symbol, so BTC, or I could even type in the name, so Bitcoin, and then I'm given many options depending on the broker that I want to choose from to use and then analyze. And you could also filter the different types of categories here or asset classes. And so if I look up Bitcoin and it's not popping up in this case, that's probably because you have the wrong category selected. So you want to click on all, or you can specify something like crypto. And so this is very useful because just clicking between all of these different assets. You could quickly analyze multiple charts within a short period of time, and you have them saved over here. Now you can also change a couple of settings on the watch list panel. So for instance, over here where we have this vertical line, if you click on that and you move it to the side, you can make this wider, you can make it narrower. But what I find to be a little bit more interesting is here on the top right-hand side. On the right, you could click on the settings panel, and then you can choose if you want to display certain data. So currently we have the last price selected as well as the percentage change. But if I click on volume, this will also show me the total volume for that given asset. And then back to that, I can also click on if I want to see the ticker, or if I want to see a full description. And so if you're someone who's new, you might not be familiar with certain ticker symbols. So for instance, I know when I first started trading, I didn't know that Apple was spelled with 2 A's in the beginning. So that's something you learn over time. But if you just want an easier way of understanding this, you would just click on the description. And then I can choose if I want to narrow these columns down or if I want to spread them apart a bit further from each other. Now I quickly just added a bunch of different assets onto my watch list panel just so I could show you guys that if you want to change the order of which they're organized in, then you could click over here to sort by the symbol name. So that way it's alphabetical. Additionally, we could sort by the lowest price. You could do that for all the other sections here. So I can sort by the change percentage, the volume, etc. Or I can just manually pick and choose which one I want above over the other. Now, if I want to divide these up a little bit further, so let's say I want to separate the stocks that I have over here into a completely separate section, then here, if we click on these 3 dots again in the settings panel, I can click on add section. And so now a section pops up. I could rename this. So let's say stocks. I can move this a bit lower, and let's say I specifically want Apple to be here and Tesla. And so you could add as many little sections as you'd like. However, if you run out of room or if you'd like to have a completely separate watch list panel saved instead of the current template that you're looking at, that's where over here on the left-hand side, I named this hello, but if you click on that, this is where you can create a new list. So everything that you see over here would be one list under the name hello. And so I have a couple of them. And so if I wanted to create a brand new one, I would click on create new list. And so that's pretty much what the watch list panel is. You could toggle this on and off. So if you want to have more room on your chart, you would just click on this and it goes away. Now below that, you have the alert section, where if you'd like to set an alert on your chart, so for instance, right now we're looking at the pound US dollar. If I want to set an alert where, let's say the price action pushes below 1.188, I would right click on my chart and I can quickly set add alert. So I can make it where this expires at a certain time. I can choose if the alert is triggered once or every single time. And we can choose if we want this alert to appear for the current chart that we're looking at or for any of the indicators that we have on. So I have the volume on as well as the RSI, and then I can choose how this gets alerted based on whether or not it crosses above or below a certain price or whatever setting you guys decide to choose. And then in the notifications panel, if you have your phone connected to TradingView, this is where you'd get a nice notification, which I find to be very helpful. So these alerts can allow you to not miss out on any trades. So that way you get alerted if you should be entering a trade based on the criteria that you set, as well as you have these options where you can have these alerts pop up in front of you on your chart, or it sends you an email. And lastly, in the settings panel here, you could change the name of your alert. So I could name this alert 101, and I can also choose the message that I want over here. So instead of this simply telling me the price that it's crossing, I could make a message that says enter a sell trade now. And so once your alert is created, on the right side where we have our y-axis where the prices are shown, we're going to see this orange arrow. And so if I click on that, I could go back to my alert and change any settings or delete it if I'd like. So I find this to be very helpful, especially when it comes to not missing out on any trade setups. And so if we go back to the right-hand side, here we have the news category where this will update you with the latest economic news depending on what you're looking at. And so this will show us the latest news based on different types of article sites. So if I go on to this article from Daily Effects and I click on it, this will take us to the article link. And so we could read more on that if we'd like. And so going lower, here we have the data window category, just shows us the different types of data for the chart that we're currently looking at. So the open, high, the low and close, the time frame, the broker that we're using, although a lot of this you could already see separately on the left-hand side, which I'll get to in just a second. Next, we have the Hotlist category, where this is simply showing us which assets have been the hottest based off of which category we have selected. So up here, it shows all the US exchanges based off of volume gainers. And so if we click on this, we could change what it shows us. So if we'd like to see the gap gainers, for instance, we click on that. Now it's showing us different stocks based off of the setting that we choose. Next up, we have the calendar section over here, which will show us the latest economic news that played out, in this case for the Forex market. And then we could also get updated on future news that's going to play out. So as of the recording of this video, today's January 5th, we can see all of the news that played out earlier today that would have affected the markets. If we want to know what's going to happen tomorrow, for instance, for January 6th, then here on the left-hand side, we can see the time as well as the currency that's going to get affected and the type of news that it is. Now this flame over here, this gives us the option to only filter and turn on high impact news. So that's where these flames over here are going to be showing us news that's a little bit more important. And so the red flames will typically bring in high impact news into the markets, which usually coincides with more volatility. So some traders prefer high volatility. Some people might not want to trade when there's high impact news in the market. So at least now you know what to avoid. Now, really quickly, if we go to the top over here where it says chart settings, I'll be going over all of this a bit later, but on the bottom here where it says events, this is where we could turn on these economic events. So that way we don't have to continually go back and forth and check out this calendar over here. So if I click on this and click on only show future events, this is going to show us the future events for later tomorrow. So if I click on this American flag over here, this is going to show us the news that's going to play out for the US dollar. And so tomorrow's Friday, the first Friday of every month is NFP day. And so that's where we have these red lines over here representing high impact news, and it's showing us the exact time for when this is going to release. So that's going to be 8:30 a.m. Eastern Standard Time tomorrow. So that's pretty helpful if I want to trade this, or maybe I want to avoid this altogether. And then if you don't just want to see the future news, so if you want to see all of the previous news that already played out, you would just deselect this box, and then that's going to show us all of the previous historical news that played out for the pound or for the US dollar. And then the events breaks section here, you could change the color if you'd like, the opacity. That's basically a nice vertical line that's showing you when the news is going to play out. So I'm on the 4-hour time frame. If I go onto a lower one, like the 5-minute chart, we don't really see that as well unless we scroll to the left or we scroll to the right. And now if I click on this light bulb over here, this is going to take us to the ideas panel, where if I have some type of idea, so let's say I analyzed my chart and I like what I see. If you click on the plus icon, you can publish an idea privately or publicly. So if you want to keep this idea to yourself, so let's say you have a really cool trade idea for the pound, and here you include a bunch of detailed analysis as to why you find this idea to be helpful. You could type that out. And then if we'd like, we could choose if this strategy is biased more to the upside. So that's where you'd click long, short, or maybe you're a bit neutral. And then you would click on a category here. You could obviously filter through all of them. There's dozens of these, but let's say our idea is revolving around using volume, for instance, then we would click on that, and maybe let's include volatility. So that's where we have these selected. We choose if we want to share this on Twitter or not. You could add some tags. And then if we publish this, there we go. This is showing us our really cool idea, and you have that here in this panel, so that way it's saved for future reference, so that way you could go back and look at it. Next up, we have the minds category, which is similar to ideas, but this is just a quick, compact way of being able to send out an analysis for other people to see. For instance, if I want to add a symbol, so let's add UJ onto this. You guys get the point. You would be a bit more detailed than this. You have that and you post it. And so now everyone can see what I'm looking at and what my opinion is, and they can comment based off of what you said. And so I don't really expect to get positive feedback on this, because honestly, I don't really think it makes sense, because it looks good. Does that mean it's bullish, bearish? But this is where we could see what other people had to say. So this is what this guy, for instance, has laid out for the pound. And so if I want, I could either upvote this to show that I like it or dislike it. Next up, we have the public chats feature. You could choose if you want to talk in either the stocks chat or the Forex chat or the crypto chat. Obviously, the cryptocurrency chat is the most popular. I remember when I first started using TradingView, it was Forex, but nonetheless, now it's crypto. And so this is where people are posting charts, analysis, giving different opinions on just about everything, so you can join the conversation if you'd like. Next up, we have the private chat section over here. Now, I don't have any messages on this because I use Discord and Telegram and whatnot to chat with people, but hey, if you guys want to say hello, you could be the first one to send me a message on this account. Go ahead. Now, if we go down even further in the ideas stream section, if you are following anyone on TradingView, if there's an author that you follow, this is where all of their ideas. So let's remember the light bulb over here. That's where you have your ideas. Any publicly shared idea will be displayed over here. Then we have streams for anyone that's streaming. If you want to tune into their streams, then you have this notification panel where, depending on the notifications that you have selected for whoever you follow or have commented on TradingView, this will be displayed over here. And then further down the list, we have our orders panel, which if you're connected to a broker, this will be displayed. So right now I'm not connected to anything, but if we click on connect over here, what's going to appear is this trading panel from the bottom. And here you're given an option to connect to any broker that is accepted by TradingView so that you could trade directly through TradingView. So I know a lot of you might be used to MetaTrader or maybe NinjaTrader or perhaps even Thinkorswim, but this way, if you do use any of these brokers, so for instance, if you use Forex.com or if you use Gemini for crypto, you can connect your account over here and trade directly on TradingView. An additional feature that I find is super helpful is you can connect a paper trading account, which is basically a practice demo account. So if I connect over here, you can see I'm starting off with a balance of 10,000. This is obviously not real money, so I can play around over here. So that way, if I'm brand new, and I highly recommend this for those of you that are just starting off, I could place different trades, and so that way I'm not risking any money. And I know some people that have been demoing for many, many months until they found a strategy that worked for them, and then they transitioned over to using real money. So I think that's very helpful. Instead of having to blow through real money right away, you could practice with that. I've created a separate video in the past that goes very in depth as far as all the different settings that you have with a paper trading account. So I'm not going to go too into that, but if, for instance, let's just quickly go onto the chart settings panel here where it says trading. If I turn on all of these settings, I can have my buy and sell buttons up here. So if I'm connected to a demo account or a real account, this is where I could quickly click buy or sell, choose whether or not it's an instant order, and I could change the lot size or quantity size over here. And then if you do place a trade, for instance, so let's say I click all of this on, this will show my position as well as a reverse button if I want to reverse my trade, and then my orders will be displayed as well. So for an example right now, let's say we would like to sell the pound. So let's say we sell 1,000 units. As soon as I clicked sell over here, I'm greeted with this nice notification that shows me how much I sold. And so now if I scroll up over here where I have the paper trading category, it shows us the asset, so the pound / US dollar, the position, the size, and whether or not I'm up or down in profit. And then you can manage all of the other settings over here. So you could see the trades you've taken before, etc., etc. Now I accidentally clicked the wrong button, so I'm gonna have to redo this, but this is where on the right hand side, if you placed a trade, you're going to see the total size of your position, how much you're up or down. And then if you want to flip your trade, so let's say you're in a sell position and then you quickly want to flip to a buy position, you would click on that. But what I find to be more helpful is where you could quickly set a take profit target as well as a stop loss over here. So let's say you executed your trade and now you want to place your stop loss, you would click on this and then you would drag it up. So because we're selling, our stop loss is going to be above the current price that we're in. And so I could set the dollar limit of how far back this is. And you can obviously play around with this a little bit more if we go back to the order panel here. So this is where if I want to place a limit order, for instance, I could play around with that. I cover that more in a separate video that's linked down below. And then this is also where you could change what your take profit is like. And so going back to the chart settings, if you'd like your chart to be a little bit cleaner, so let's say you don't want to see these arrows here based off of the trade that you took, you would unclick where it says executions, and then where it says brackets, profit and loss, I could choose if my stop loss and take profit is shown in money or in pips or in percentages. Usually I think pips is the way to go, or you can just stick to percent, as that way you're not too tempted based off the dollar amount. So that way psychologically you're not too affected based off your trade. And then lastly, we have the DOM tool over here for level 2 market data for those of you that want to use that. That's usually going to be used for short-term traders for the most part. Now, if we continue with TradingView over here, let's say you don't like the way that your chart looks like, which I'm just going to take a guess that 90% of you will go ahead and change the default settings a little bit. That's where if you go onto the chart settings panel over here, so where I was previously at, if we go up to symbol, so let's start from the top. This is where, in this case, if you're looking at a candlestick chart, so that's what we have currently selected. So that's where we have these candlesticks. You can change the color of the body as well as the border and the wick. So if I want to make this white and black, which is also a very popular option, I could have this turned on. And then if I want to have the borders turned on or off, I could choose that as well as the wicks. And the wicks would be these outer tails that are separated from the candle bodies. And so if we continue down the road here, next you have this last section, which basically shows you the last price that we were trading at. So that's where you have this horizontal line over here. If I deselect that, this will disappear. If you want that on, you could turn it on. You could also turn on or off if you want to see the previous daily close. You could change the color. You could also change the opacity as well as the thickness of what you're seeing. So I find that to be pretty helpful if maybe you want to see the previous daily close, but you don't want this to cover up half your chart, for instance. And then you have the high and low, which you can select, as well as the bid and ask prices. So the bid and the ask, typically you'll see these two lines. The distance between the two will represent the spread based off of your broker. Down over here, the precision is set to default. You could play around with this, but I usually keep it at default. And then you have your time zone. Next up in the status line category, here we can see if we want the ticker to be displayed on the top left-hand side. So let me actually move the screen a little bit over. If I have it set to the ticker and description, it'll show the ticker as well as the written format. Now the open market status, that's just going to be this dot over here. It'll show you if the market is open. So in this case, it's green, which shows us that we can trade this if we'd like. Next, you have OHLC values. That simply stands for open, high, low, and close. And so for the current bar that we're looking at, for instance, so this current candlestick, we can see how it's priced at 1.19094. And so the high is going to get affected. So I'm moving around my mouse, so that's why it changes. But if we look at that from here, it's basically going to be set at that price. And then if you want to see how much each bar changes, turn that on or off, as well as the volume. And then next up for indicators, you can choose if you want the titles to be displayed and the arguments and the values. So in my case, one indicator that I have on right now is the RSI over here. So it's showing us the title. Let me quickly go back to that. If I want this to be off where it doesn't show that it's the RSI, I can click on that. Now the arguments is simply just going to show the settings that it's set to, and then the values is just going to show the current value. So currently on the 5-minute time frame that we're on, the RSI is at, let me quickly turn this on, it's at 48.82, right? So that's where we're approaching the 50 level over here. One thing that you guys will notice, if you use an indicator that's in a panel set above or below, so in this case, the RSI is below my chart. If I double click on my screen, I can open it or quickly close it. And so if I want to move the RSI, so if I right click on the RSI, go over here to move to and click on existing panel above. Now you'll see that it's currently being displayed on the chart that we have. Usually I have this separate. So if we go on to move to again, so I right clicked on the RSI, click on move to new panel above. Now it's displayed on the top of my chart. So it's personal preference really, but that's what you would do. So next up you have the scales tab. This is where you can choose if the symbol name appears next to the last price, so this horizontal line over here. If you want that on, you keep it on. You can play around with all these other settings here, so the bid and the ask, if you want that displayed on the right hand side, as well as the indicator name. So in this case, I have volume turned on down here. If you want the name turned on where it says volume, you have that turned on. So a lot of these settings are simply, like it says, they're mostly just going to pertain to the scales that you see over here. So this is the y-axis scale. That's where we can see the price. And then down here, we can choose if we want to see the countdown until the next bar that opens or closes. So in this case, we have about a little over a minute left before this current 5-minute candle closes. I find this to be pretty helpful, so I usually keep this turned on. And for the rest of the settings over here, you could change the date format, the hour format. This is what I usually have it set to. Now the scale that we see on the right, so the price is here on the right. If you'd like, if you don't want this to be on the right hand side, you could actually move this to the left. And lastly, over here in the appearance section, you have a bunch of additional settings that you guys can choose for your charts. So let me just hide the volume really quickly. The background, you can choose what the background is like. So I have it set to white. If you want it to be gray or blue, you could change it over here. Now I do believe that it's a little bit helpful if there is some contrast on your chart, so that way all the colors don't bleed together when you're analyzing it. Instead of a solid color, you could also have a gradient turned on. So if I click on this, I have two colors over here. So it's basically blending two colors. So if I have white selected with blue, now you can see how the top, right? So the first color starts off as white, but then as we move our way to the bottom of the screen, this turns blue. And if you want to mess around with these colors a little bit more, these are just the default settings, but down here where we have this add custom color option, if we click on the plus sign here, we can move this a little bit over. So let's say we make this a little bit lighter. Next up, you have vertical grid lines and horizontal lines. I'm sure if you logged on to TradingView for the first time, these are turned on. I have them turned off, but it is personal preference if you want them turned on or off. If you want them off, just go onto this and set your opacity all the way down to 0. If you want them to be a little bit darker, you would increase your opacity, and then you could change what the lines are like. So you could have a line chart, dashed line, dotted line, but in my case, I have this set a little bit lower. Now the sessions break option over here, you might not see it if you're looking at a lower time frame. So in this case, we're on the 5-minute chart. But if I go on to, let's say, the 4-hour chart, now we're seeing more of these vertical lines, right? So over here, this is 5 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. This was on the 4th. That's where we have this vertical line. 24 hours later, you have another one. Next up with the pane separators over here, this is really just separating your chart from the indicator. So with my RSI, if I have this set to red, it's separating these two with a red line. Then you have this watermark, which if we click on that, some people prefer when they have this on their chart. So that way right in the middle, which can be a little bit distracting, but if you decrease the opacity right in the middle, you can see the exact chart that you're looking at as well as the time frame. Then where you have the crosshair over here, if I bring up my favorites panel up a little bit closer, the crosshair is going to allow you to quickly narrow down whatever price you're looking at to a certain time and date. So for instance, let's go back to the 5-minute chart. And if I want to narrow down my chart, for those wondering, I just click on the y-axis over here. I click and drag to the upside or to the downside, so that way I could flatten this out or make it longer. But with the crosshair tool, if for instance I want to hover over to what happened a couple of minutes ago, so let's say I'm looking at the bottom of this candle that closed at 5 p.m. so 16 minutes ago. If I hover over here, it shows us the date on the bottom as well as the time, so you can see that. And then I can also narrow this down to the exact price. Next up, you could change the text colors as well as the text size. And then these lines, these vertical and horizontal lines that essentially hold the chart together, you could change the color over here. Next up, we have the buttons section. I have both of these set to invisible. All this really means is that if I have this set to always invisible, down near the bottom of your chart in the middle, you're going to have these buttons where if you click on them, you could either zoom in, you could zoom out on your chart, as well as you can scroll to the left and to the right. And then over here, you could reset your chart really quickly if you'd like. So I have this turned off because in my case, I just use my mouse to either scroll in and out, so that way I could zoom in and out, and then I click and drag. So to me, it's pretty quick to do it this way, but if you'd like to turn that on, you can. Additionally, a quick tip that I mentioned before is you could drag the y-axis here to make your bars a bit longer or shorter. If you do it the same thing to the x-axis over here, this will keep your chart nice and even, but it'll zoom out or it'll zoom in your bars in a different way. And lastly, the margins here, I usually set these pretty low, but if you have them set higher, so let's say we set this to 30 and the bottom set to 30, all this is really going to do is give you some space between the bars or candles that you're looking at and the top or the bottom of your chart. Being set to 30, there's a lot of space above and below these candlesticks. If I set this down again to 8, this will widen out. Now, the reason this is helpful is because on the bottom right-hand side, here where it says toggle auto scale, if I have this turned off, then I can move around my chart however, right? I could scroll back, I could zoom this in, zoom it out. But if I want to go back to how it is originally, then if I click on auto scale, then it'll compress everything together so that way it's not disorganized. And then obviously you could also change the margin on the right. So there's a bigger gap between the y-axis, for instance, and the last bar that you're looking at. In the chart settings panel, if you like what you see, so let's say you found a theme that suits you, then that's where here where it says template on the bottom left-hand side, if we click on that, I could either apply the defaults that TradingView has for me, or I could save my template as a new one. And I know I have a dozen of these. I don't use most of them, so I need to honestly get in the habit of deleting some of them, but that's where I could save my theme as something brand new and then filter between the themes. So now let's get into the left-hand side of TradingView and let's go over some of the tools that are available. So what you guys might have already seen is this is where I have my favorites panel. So this is all of the tools that I use the most frequently. I find that it's pretty convenient, so I have this set in this section over here. If you want that turned on, then on the bottom left-hand side, this is where we have this blue star. So it says show favorite drawings tool. Toolbar, if I have this turned off, this will go away, but if I click on this, it'll appear and I could drag this around. Now, how I choose what's in here depends on what I favorite, right? So if we start on the left-hand side here, you have the crosshair, the dot. And so if I want to quickly switch between the mouse and the crosshair, then I would favorite these. And so if we go down the list, next up, we have different types of lines that you can use. Now there's a ton of them, but usually the most common ones that people will use or that I use is the horizontal line, as well as maybe the vertical line or the trend line over here. Now a quick tip if you're drawing with the trend line is you can hold shift, and that way if you drag to the left or right, you'll have this nice horizontal line. And so let's say I do have a line. In this case, I have this horizontal line over here. If I click on it, this is where we're given a bunch of different settings where, of course, I could change the color, I could change the opacity, the thickness of this, as well as the type of line, so dashed, dotted, or just a regular line. But if I move on to the right over here, I can type out some text. So if I want a horizontal line that represents support or a demand zone or an imbalance or whatever you guys like to use, or maybe you just want that to display a certain price, you can type this out and then obviously change the colors and size of whatever fits your needs. So you can move this to the top, to the middle, to the bottom, whatever you find to be helpful. And then coordinates. So this is very useful, I find, where let's say you drew a line, but you want to refine it just a little bit. And so instead of dragging to an exact price, I can just click on coordinates here. And let's say I want to set this exactly to 1800. I would set that. And there we go. It is set exactly to 1800 for gold. And next up, you have the visibility section over here. Now, this is very helpful because let's say, for instance, right now, this line is going to be drawn on all of these time frames, right? So it's on the seconds chart, the minutes, the hours, the days. But let's say I don't want this to be displayed below the daily chart. So right now I'm on the 8-hour chart, and on the top left-hand side, that's where you guys can see all of your different time frames or time intervals. Same thing, just different name. So if I'm currently on the 8-hour chart and I don't want this to be displayed on the 8-hour, I would deselect this, and so now this disappears. But if I click on the daily chart, now this reappears again. So that way, if I want a certain drawing to be shown on a certain time frame, but not on another one, I could filter that over here. And so I find this to be very, very helpful. And then of course, where it says template, you could save your theme as something specific. So that way you can use the same setting in the future. Now, a quick tip, if you just want to take a drawing of yours, where in this case we have this horizontal line, and let's say you want to copy it over, you could right click on it and click on clone. That's pretty helpful to do. But a quicker way of doing this if you're using Windows is if you press and hold Control while clicking on your drawing, that will automatically copy it, and you could drag this over wherever you'd like. So it doesn't just have to be the line tool. If I use the rectangle tool over here and I draw a box over here, let's say I like this shape and size that it's showing me, I could either clone it or just press and hold Control and drag this over. So these are all the different types of lines that you have. Next up, if we go a bit further, here's all of the different types of Fibonacci's that you could use. There are many of them, which I'm not going to cover, although I do like to use the Fibonacci retracement and extension tool. So I find that to be pretty helpful sometimes if I combine that with the overall market structure and whatnot. Obviously, if you have a tool that you're not familiar with, this is just a rule that's going to apply to about everything on TradingView. If you want to change the color or the size or the setting, then in this case, you would just click on the tool. So in this case, I have these Fibonacci levels turned on. I would click on that. You could change the visibility, the coordinates, like I mentioned before, but then that's where I'm given a completely separate menu of where I could turn on or off different Fibonacci levels, change the colors, etc., etc. Next to that, we have the brush tool. So this is where you can draw something on your chart. So in this case, if I want to circle this entire bullish trend that played out over the last couple of weeks, I can. And then if I click on that, I could change the color to make this, let's say, blue. Then you have the highlighter tool, which is just a different type of brush. This one's a little bit thicker. And then as far as the drawings go, this was in the top. This is where we have the eraser tool. So if you have the eraser tool, if you quickly click on a drawing, it'll get deleted immediately. Next, we have our annotation tools. So this is very helpful if you'd like to, for instance, if I want to say that this is a bullish trend, I could add this text over here. Let's make this maybe a little bit bigger. Let's change the text, make it blue. And there we go. I can have this on my chart. So that way this tells me what has happened, right? So this can be very helpful if you're back testing, looking back on your chart. Let's say you want to write some notes, but you want it to be displayed at a certain given time on your chart, then you would use the text tool to do that. But there's different types of text tools, of course. You have the text tool, you have notes that you can use, signposts. You can add a tweet to a specific time. So you would add the link to a tweet. And if you have that, you could add that onto your chart. You also have the price label here. So if you want to display a specific price, you would use that. You have different arrows, and then what else? We also have the comment and call out tool. Now I usually like the call out tool because that just gives you a nice bubble. So it is similar to the text tool over here, except this bubble will be anchored to a certain point. So I could connect this to a high, a low. I could connect this to a certain level. So that way I know which direction I should be focusing my eyes on. Next up, you have everything related to different types of patterns, whether you're using something for harmonics. This is pretty neat because it automatically measures out different Fibonacci ratios for you. So that way you know if you have a harmonic pattern or not. So that's one way of doing it. Additionally, you have a ton of these patterns. So you have the head and shoulders patterns, Elliott waves, etc., etc. And the next panel, this is what I find to be very, very useful. So the long position and short position tool. This can be helpful for you guys because you'll be able, so for instance, if I click on the short position tool, I'll be given something like this. You'll be able to see on your chart what a potential trade setup might look like. So a lot of people usually use this where you can take that, put that over the most recent price. In this case, the upper portion of red would represent my stop loss level. So I can move this up or down, and the bottom would represent my take profit target. Now in the middle, this is showing my risk to reward ratio. I have it set to the compact mode. If I turn this off, this is going to show us more information about this. Now in the inputs, you could set your account size, how much you're risking. So that's an option for you to do. But for the most part, I just like this for being able to quickly show me my risk to reward ratio. For this type of setup, if I'm taking this type of trade, my risk to reward is a 1-to-3, meaning that my potential reward is 3 times greater than my potential risk, right? But if we flip this around, so let's say my take profit is 1/3 of my potential loss, then that's where my risk to reward is now 0.33 or 3-to-1. And so this is the short position tool. You can also have the long position tool turned on. Next up, we have the forecast tool. This is just a forecast where if we're predicting a certain type of situation to play out in the market, and this is going to show us a ton of data. So it shows us this arrow. So this arrow will show us how much gold would have to push in order to get to this price within 10 days, right? So it would have to drop 3.3% in this case. Next up, we have the date range and price range tool. So really the date range, if you take this, drag it across on your chart, it's going to show you how many bars you're selecting as well as how many days have gone by. Whereas the price range is basically showing you the price and percentage, right? So if we connect from November 23rd's low all the way up to the most recent high, this is showing us that this pushed up a little over 8%. And it's showing us how many points this pushed as well. Next, we have the date and price range tool, which pretty much combines the previous tool. Then we have the bars pattern tool, which I find to be helpful if you're trying to visualize what the market might do next and you want to draw that in a way that it looks like a bunch of bars on your chart. So for instance, if we're visualizing a correction on gold, where right now it is bullish and we can't see what the future will look like, but if we want to, for instance, predict what it might look like if the chart would correct, then if I click on the bars pattern tool again, and let me use this most recent bullish push. So what you're basically doing is you're connecting to an area that previously played out, taking that, dragging that over. And then if we right click on this, I can mirror this or flip it. And so let's flip it again. So if it's mirrored, right? So if we visualize a correction on gold, where let's say it pushes to 1800 or a little bit lower, this is what it would look like. Next up, we have a similar setting with the ghost feed. This is very similar to what I currently did, except it's just going to display a bunch of candlesticks. Next, you have the projection tool, which is just a visual aid for you to connect to. And then you have the fixed range volume profile tool. Now I quickly want to go over this because I get asked about this a lot in my videos. This is what I use a lot when it comes to my analysis. And thankfully this is free, so you guys will be able to use this. These are all the settings that I have for my volume profile. So all this is really doing is that if you connect to a certain swing low up to a swing high or vice versa, this will basically show you all the transaction volume that was traded throughout that period of time. So this can be helpful for showing where you had more volume. So for instance, where we have this peak. That's the point of control. It could show you the value area, which I have in blue, where we have the majority of volume, or 70%. And then you can also see where we had imbalances in volume. Next up, we have the icons section. So if you want to draw some icons or add them onto your chart, so for instance, a thumbs up or a smiley face, you're able to do so. Now, something very useful that TradingView added very recently actually is on the bottom where it says icons. If you click on emojis, you can add emojis onto your chart. So if we want a big smiley face, that's an emoji, then this is what it'll look like. And you could scroll through them and choose whichever types of emojis that you want. If we want to add a check mark, we could do that over here. Next, you have the measure tool. So it already shows us which hotkeys we can use if we quickly want to measure something on the chart. So what I usually do is I press and hold shift, and then I click, and then I drag up or down. So that's a very quick way of being able to see how many bars have passed by, how many pips or ticks the market has moved up or down, and how much it has also moved percentage-wise. Next, you have the zoom in or out feature. So that way, if you just want to zoom in on a certain section of your chart, you can do this. Below that, we have the magnet tool. And all that really means, like it says, is it snaps the most recent drawings to the nearest highs and lows. So I have this turned on. Let's say I'm using this Fibonacci retracement that I drawn. And let's say I try and connect to the low from November 3rd. This will be pretty tricky to do, but if I turn this on, well, now this will automatically connect to this low or to the most recent lows. So that way I don't have to play around with trying to guess the exact price. I could just click on the magnet and it connects to that automatically. Now, drawing mode over here, if you click on this, what this really does is if you draw something, so for instance, let's say I draw a box using the rectangle tool, and then I'm done drawing it. If I click again anywhere else, it'll draw another one. So you're just continually drawing, which can be helpful if you want to add a bunch of different drawings all at once, because if I have this turned off and I try doing that again, each and every single time I'm going to have to go back, find the rectangle tool and do it over and over. So I think that's a convenient way to add multiple drawings if you'd like onto your chart. Next up, if you'd like, you could turn this on to lock all of your drawing tools. Below that, you have this option to hide all of your drawings. So for instance, I have all of these drawings that I added throughout this video. If I click on this, this is going to hide all the drawings. If I click this again, they will reappear. So that way, if you just want to look at a nice clean chart, you can do that without having to get rid of all your drawings. And then here you can choose if you hide indicators, drawings, orders. And then lastly, on the left-hand side over here, we have the trash can icon, which if you click on that, this will ask you if you want to delete your drawings or your indicators or both. One last feature that I wanted to mention as far as these drawings go is on the right-hand side on the bottom here, which I didn't go over, but where we have these 3 stacked boxes. If you click on this, this is where you have the object tree. Now this can be very helpful because this will show you all of your drawings individually on your chart. So that way, one, you get to see everything that's drawn. So let's say for whatever reason, you had a drawing that disappeared on a certain time frame and you don't know if it's still on a certain time frame or not, you'll see your drawing again, right? So that way you can access it, change these settings, or you can also organize your drawings into different folders, which I find to be super useful. So I don't have a lot of them over here, but let's say I did. And so let's say I have a couple of these zones drawn out and I want to organize them in their own folder. Then what I can do is if I click on this, right? So I right clicked on it where it says create a group of drawings. If I click on that, it'll create its own folder. So this is called group 1, but if I right click on it and rename it, so let's say I name this zones, then if I take all my other drawings and move it into this folder, I have this organized. So that way, if I want to hide all of these zones without also having to hide my other drawings, I would just go onto this folder icon. I could also compress this down a little bit. If I click on the eye over here, I can hide it. Additionally, I could also lock this. And so what that means is that if I'm analyzing a chart, so let's say I'm analyzing gold and I have these zones drawn, if you don't have them locked and you accidentally click on it and drag to the side, you might accidentally move it, right? but if it's locked, then you won't be able to. So in this case, I can't move it as much as I want. I'm clicking on it, dragging it, it doesn't allow me. So I would actually have to unlock this in order to be able to move this zone. Now going back to the chart, just a quick tip that I can give is if you have certain drawings drawn on your chart, and let's say they're covering your candlesticks, or you want one drawing to appear over another one, then what you can do is if you right click on your drawing, so let's say we're selecting this rectangle here, if I right click this, I could change the visual order. And trust me, I use this a lot. I find this is a very helpful feature. So we do have this option here of where we could go back to the object tree. I discussed that. But if I click on visual order, I could make this go to the front, meaning that this is going to be above my Fibonacci drawing over here. So that's why the opacity of this one is a little bit lower. But if I click on the candlesticks and I do the same thing, so right click on that, visual order, send to back, I could have these behind my drawing. So it really comes down to personal preference, but this is how you guys can move and sort of decide whether or not one drawing or one tool is above or below another one. And so now let's go over the top section over here. So I already discussed that this is where we have our time frames of where we can play around with them. Now, if you don't have a pro account, you might not have these time frames available to you. So you might only have the option to trade the 15-minute, the 5-minute, the 4-hour, the 1-hour. That's totally fine. But if you want to select certain time frames to appear up here, or if you don't want to see them, that's where you would click on the star icon. So if I want to remove the 1 month time frame, so I don't want to see the monthly time frame, when I deselected the star, this no longer appears over here. But if I want to bring it back, now I brought it back. Now on the top left-hand side over here, where we have this circle with this plus icon in the middle, this is where we can compare or add symbols, meaning that right now I'm looking at gold. But if I want to have gold stacked with another asset on top of it, I'm able to do so. And I find this to be a very helpful feature that I use from time to time. So if I click on this, let's say I want to have gold and Bitcoin on the same chart. Here where it says Bitcoin, if I hover over it, I could choose if it's on the same percentage scale, new price scale, or new pane. Usually I set it to new price scale. And so if I click on that and exit out of here, now we can see Bitcoin on top of gold. So if I zoom out on the daily, here we can look at the exact dates, right? So we can see how gold was performing, for instance, in November of 2021 versus Bitcoin. And I have this set to the line chart over here for Bitcoin. But if I click on that, if I'd like, I could change the style. So that way it's not a line chart. I can make this a candlestick chart again. And if I'd like, I could change the colors here. And then obviously on the right-hand side where we have the price scale, here we see the price scale for gold as well as for Bitcoin. And so that's something useful for those of you if you want to use that. And then if you want to get rid of that, on the top left-hand side here, you would just click X to remove Bitcoin in this case. Now a little bit further to the left before I move over to the right and we look at the indicators and whatnot. Here on the top left corner, this is showing that I'm logged in as myself. But if I click on this, this is where I could change the language. I could choose if I want the drawings panel here on the left to be displayed or not. And this is additionally where I could turn on the dark mode for TradingView. So for those of you wondering how you turn on the dark mode, so that way it's not light, here's how you do that. And so now we can see my chart turn dark. So now the background is dark. This is obviously the default display, but this is how we can go to that. And then up here, you have the home panel, the help center, but additionally, what I like over here is where it says what's new. This is where you get the latest updates for TradingView. So for instance, when I mentioned that TradingView recently added emojis, that occurred a week ago. So I got this nice notification on here that usually pops up, and that's where you will get updates from TradingView. Now, the last thing over here, aside from the sign out button, which is self-explanatory, this is where we have the keyboard shortcuts section. And this is very useful because here you're given a ton of different hotkeys that you can use in order to make your TradingView experience a lot better. So for instance, if you quickly want to undo something that you did on TradingView, you would click Control-Z. I click this very often. Or if you want to redo something, you would click Control-Y. You can also quickly save your chart by clicking Control and S, although there is an option to automatically save that, which I'll cover in a little bit. And then there's a bunch of other settings as well over here. So we have that. Let's move over to the right over here. This is where we can choose our chart style. So I had it set to candles, but I could also change it to a line chart, a bar chart. There's other charts as well, but some of them are only given to you if you have TradingView Pro. So for instance, a Renko chart, I do believe that's a pro feature. So you have a bunch of different chart styles to utilize if you'd like. Hikanashi, line break charts, high and low charts. So that's all personal preference. Next, we have the indicators section over here, where these are my favorite indicators that I have favorited. So that appears right away. Now, if there's a certain indicator that you want, so for instance, if you want a moving average, and we type that here, it's going to show us our favorite moving averages that we have selected, but it's also going to show us all the community moving averages. And so you guys can see there's literally thousands of them, and it shows you who created them as well as what the name is. So you could see the source code here to the right, but something that's a little bit more helpful without having to click on an indicator and then going back, deleting it if you don't like it, is where it says read more. If you click on that, it'll just show you a quick display of what that indicator looks like. So that way you can avoid clicking on an indicator that you later have to delete. So that way, if you're scrolling through different indicators and you want to see what they look like, in this case, can't do that here on the technicals tab because I believe that's the default for TradingView. But if we go on to community scripts, so there we go. These are the community indicators here where it says read more. We could do that for each and every single one of them. Now, I personally don't really use indicators all that much. I mostly just trade based off the price action and the volume and the market structure. I discuss all of that in my videos, as some of you guys might already know. But if you do use indicators and you want to play around with them, you could add them over here. So for instance, let's go on to my favorites. If I want to turn on, for instance, the average true range, there we go. Now it appears. So I had my RSI here on the top, but now the average true range is here on the bottom. And if I click on that, I could change the inputs. And depending on the account that you have, you might have a limit on how many indicators you can use, which I believe the default is 3. But obviously, if you have TradingView Pro or Premium, you're given the option to use much more. Next to that, you have indicator templates for any specific templates that you want to use. Now, quickly going back to them, where it says my scripts, I'm not really someone that uses this, but if you guys have an indicator idea that you want to code onto TradingView, or let's say there's a public indicator that you want to modify, then on the bottom left-hand side over here, where it says Pine Editor, this is where you have the option to do so. So Pine Script is TradingView's own language for being able to program different indicators and stuff like that onto TradingView. So for those of you interested in doing that, you can modify that over here where you have the Pine Editor. Next to that, you have the Strategy Tester. And then next to that, to the left, this is also pretty important. We can choose whether we're looking at a stock screener, a forex screener, as well as a crypto screener. So the screeners here are just a quick way of being able to look at different assets. So in this case, we're looking at cryptocurrencies, and to filter them depending on whatever setting we have turned on. So this is the current screener that we have. If I click on Overview over here, this is just a rough overview of all of these altcoins based on the 30-minute time interval. So if I change that over here to, let's say, the daily chart, this will change, right? And so if I want, I can click here on the High tab, which will show me the highest prices. So the highest priced altcoins, I could scroll all the way down to the lowest, or I can click on low. I could also filter this based off of volume. There's a whole bunch of stuff here. You could honestly spend hours filtering this. There's thousands of different settings, but this is what you guys can use. And then you can flag and select certain altcoins or charts that you want displayed, which actually reminds me, let me quickly go back to the Watchlist panel over here. But additionally, if you have a certain asset that you like, here to the left, you have this flag where if you click on that, you could change the different colors of each flag. I believe the default is red, unless you have TradingView Pro. But if, for instance, you want to change between different colors. So for instance, let's say I'm bullish on something like the dollar index, but then I'm bearish on something like Apple. This is just an example. Well, over here on the top left-hand side, if I click on that, I have a red list, and then I also have a green list. And so this can be pretty helpful because let's say you're bullish on certain assets, you could take that, make that a certain color, or let's say you have a trade running for your USD, you can make that purple. And so that way you can just organize different assets based on the criteria that you have set for it. Next up, you have the alert section over here. You could create an alert. I already kind of discussed that. Then beyond that, let me actually go back to the candlestick chart. Let's maybe go on to the 1 hour. You could click on the bar replay feature. Now, intraday charts are only given to pro accounts, so you might not be able to go below the daily chart, but this is a very helpful way for you to be able to scroll back to a certain period of time and see what the charts looked like for that given day or moment. So for instance, this is what gold looked like on the 22nd at 1 a.m. Eastern Standard Time, December 22nd. And so I could play this forward. I could change the speed. So if I play this forward, this is obviously pretty quick speed. So let me pause that. I could play this forward and see how this played out. So this can be pretty helpful maybe if you're back testing and so you're practicing, or if you just want to see what the chart looked like at a certain period of time. And then if you want to get out of this, what I usually do is I click on the replay bar here and it takes me out of it as well. Now, TradingView did very recently actually add this feature where you can click sell or buy to practice around. So that's something that's also helpful. And lastly, on the right-hand side over here, if we click on this rectangle, you can choose how many charts are being displayed at once. So for instance, right now we're looking at one chart. With TradingView Pro, which is what I have, I can have two charts displayed side by side. I could also have this horizontally placed. And for the second chart, the template is going to be a little bit different. So you're going to have to set a separate template if you open up a second chart, but then you could take that window and drag it up or down side to side. So that way you have two separate charts. And so you actually can have up to 8. And then you can choose how these charts are synced based on the crosshair, the time, the symbol, and the intervals. That's pretty useful to do. So for instance, if we go back to gold, and here we have the dollar index again, if I go and click onto interval, you can see how both of these charts are now on the 8-hour time frame. And so if I go onto gold and I change onto the daily, the dollar index will also change onto the daily. So that way I don't manually have to go back and forth. And if I click on the crosshair, all this will really do. So if I have the crosshair and I have that selected, this will be selected on both charts. So that way I could look at the same date for both of them and compare and contrast the two. And then lastly over here, you can change the layout for your chart completely. You could rename it, and then you also choose how you save your chart. So I highly recommend that you have autosave turned on, so that way your charts automatically are saved if you add a drawing and stuff like that, so it doesn't get lost. Also, one more feature that I forgot to mention, but that I use pretty frequently is the snapshot tool. So if I go over here on the top right, next to the full screen mode icon, here we can see a camera icon. And so if you click on take a snapshot, this will give you a ton of different options. And what this basically allows you to do is the chart analysis or the chart that you see in front of you. You could either save the image to your computer. So if you want to look back on this in the future, whether you're journaling a trade or whatnot, you're able to do so. You could copy the image. You can even tweet the image. So this links me to my Twitter account where I can quickly tweet this. And it also provides me a link to my analysis. If I click on this, here you guys can see a snapshot of what my trade setup looked like. So this is incredibly helpful, again, for either saving this or if you wanted to share this with any trading communities or forums, you're able to do so. So on the top left, it has your TradingView username, the time you posted this, and yeah, that's something that I find to be super helpful. And one last tip that I just want to give for those of you that might be using TradingView on a device that has it pretty zoomed in, if you want your chart to appear a little bit bigger, then what you can do is you could go onto your browser setting and you can zoom out. I had it set to 100. I zoomed out to 90. You could use just about any browser. And so if I zoom out, the downside is the text does appear a little bit smaller, but this does make my chart a lot bigger. So that way, if it's super zoomed in, right, and I don't want it to be super zoomed in, then that way I could zoom out so that way it looks a lot bigger. So yeah, hopefully I covered everything for you guys, especially those of you that are new to trading and new to TradingView. Of course, there's a link down in the description to my trading community. And yeah, if you enjoyed this, like and subscribe. If you have any questions or if you found something that I forgot to add, drop it down in the comment section below. And thanks for watching. I will see you all in the next one.